Hey, everybody, welcome back to another Conversations with Experts. Today, I'm talking to an old friend, Chad Torrin, who is the CEO and founder of Connect Financial. Chad, welcome to the show.
Thanks. That's been watching it for a while. Excited to be a part of it.
Awesome. Well, we know you're an expert on a lot of things finance, insurance, and accounting, and we're going to bring those all together to provide some useful information to entrepreneurs that watch and listen. So, stretch and look forward to getting going here.
Likewise. Likewise.
So, Chad, tell us a little bit about your story. You're a CPA. You have extensive experience in the business world. Tell us your background and how you arrived at founding Connect Financial.
Sure. Well, like you said, the background kind of started together in a way, going to the same accounting school at University of Florida.
That's right.
And I kind of come from the son of a 30-year partner in a CPA firm, so it really was a natural start down a path. And but I did know pretty early on that I didn't want to practice in the traditional sense that he did from just a tax standpoint. And I guess you can either say I have a thirst for knowledge or a glutton for punishment. I always had this desire to go to law school. And so after practicing as a CPA for about 5 years, decided to make the leap to attend law school at the age of 28. And but really, even in law school, my focus was not on becoming an attorney to practice law in the traditional sense, but really I went and took every tax law class, business law class that I possibly could to get a strong foundation, of extra knowledge to eventually start building my financial planning practice, which started almost right after passing the bar. So I went right from law school to the bar to about 11 years ago, building my financial planning practice, but really incorporating all of the other disciplines. And my impetus for getting started was really the aha moment was when I was sitting in law school with a lot of educated people and realizing that none of them knew anything about money, right? They're being trained to be lawyers. They're going to go out and have their own practices. And, they didn't have the base knowledge needed. And so a lot of what I love doing is the educational side of the financial planning part. And obviously there's strategies that have to get put in place, but it's really the education component that is one of my passions.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure so much of your foundational knowledge, you need that skill set to translate it into your clients in ways that they understand, right? You can't
Sure.
just take the book and take the laws and read it to your clients. There's so much more that you need to do, right?
If it wasn't in a way they don't understand, they'd probably fall asleep. So yeah,
Right.
I'm gonna make it fun and interesting, and give analogies that make sense for people.
Sure, absolutely. So let's dive into a little bit more of the tactical piece of it. Speaking to entrepreneurs specifically, what are the considerations that entrepreneurs should think about when it comes to insurance and wealth management?
Sure. With respect to insurance and wealth management, one of the things that I always start with a business owner is helping them understand that there's not any advisor out there that will ever do a better job in terms of growing their wealth, in terms of rates of return, than they will actually get in their own business, provided that they are getting the proper guidance and counseling on how to actually run and operate the business if they don't know that, right? And so right off the
Right.
bat, I really want them to start thinking of their business as an asset themselves, and how do you increase the value of that asset over time. And whether it's you want to be a lifestyle business owner and you'll work till the day you die, or you want to exit one day and how do we help drive value. If you think of your business as an asset, well, then all of a sudden the insurance and the investment conversations become a lot easier, right? Because like any asset, right? And any asset, most people protect their assets, right? And so if this business is going to one day be their biggest asset, how do you go ahead about protecting that value as early as can be, but at the same time recognize that as an entrepreneur, especially a startup, many times cash flow is one of the biggest issues. And so how do
Right.
you design things that can give the protection that they need, but in an affordable way now, but then gives them the flexibility to grow with them as their business grows?
Yep.
And so one of the things there is, really looking at it from a protecting an asset standpoint and then
Yep.
transitioning that asset. And then from an investment side, because of the fact that the rate of return in a business is better than most advisors can ever do, is getting the business owner to understand that, hey, I still have to carve out a portion of my profit to actually invest in other assets. Because if the business does go ahead and fail, well, now they might not have, they could have worked 10, 15, 20 years and have nothing built up and nothing to show for it. So
Right.
really getting them to understand, hey, this is going to be my biggest asset, no doubt, but what do we do with that excess and how do we start growing that in a meaningful way?
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked about a couple things there. One is risk mitigation. Now, so much of what we do at ProSeer is working with the entrepreneurs and helping them grow the value of that asset, grow the enterprise value through improving sales, back office operations, profitability, really understanding their business so they can grow that asset. But they need to really focus on protecting that asset, and that's where you come along with insurance and insuring away risk. So protecting against risk can help in the event of unexpected events such as the death of a partner or business interruption. There are all different things, different risks that affect businesses, and so that's one thing I heard that I think is important. The second thing is
The lists are endless, right? We're in very much an employee-driven market right now, and one of the biggest things we see is the risk of losing a key person, right? And so, how do you protect against that through different retention and recruiting strategies? That's something that we're doing a ton of now.
yeah, say more
But
about that.
yeah, so you know, we're in this market where, particularly since COVID kind of came and went, where people are leaving jobs for a $10,000 raise, or, hey, this company is offering a slightly better benefit package. Let me jump ship, right? Or, the list can go on and on. And
Yeah,
so there's lots of ways to, I don't want to say prevent that from happening, because you can't actually prevent someone from leaving, probably go to jail for that. But there's ways to entice them to stay for these
right.
key people, right?
Yeah.
And so there's different, without getting technical, because like I said, everyone would fall asleep, but there are
Well, give me
essentially,
some specifics. Give some tangible recommendations that
so,
you recommend.
there are things called, leverage bonus strategies, right? Where, and I'll take a step back. In the traditional benefits package arena, right? Typically, you can't discriminate. So if you have a 401k, you can't give more to one person than another. If you have group benefit, group health, group, whatever this may be, you have to give the same for everyone,
Right.
right? But there's a whole world, a whole landscape of things out there outside of the space where you can discriminate. You can pick and choose who gets what benefit, how much benefit they get. And here's where the retention and recruiting component comes in, is actually you can have legal constructs on the outside that prevent them, almost like a vesting schedule in a 401k, but it's a vesting schedule until they actually vest in receiving this special benefit,
Yeah.
right? And so it's a way for a business owner to do several things. One, and if it's done correctly using insurance, the immediate is, hey, this person passes away, the business just took a big hit. That's your traditional key person type planning you think of,
Yep.
right? But from a retention and recruitment standpoint, you can essentially uh, put collateral on the benefit you're giving them, right? So if you bonus someone, um, you know, an insurance plan, right, that's going to grow an asset. We'll get to the different kinds of insurance and how it can be utilized,
Yep.
right? But essentially, any sort of bonus can cause a tax on that employee,
Right.
right? Now, if you do what's called a double bonus, which is basically the business bonusing that employee that what would be the tax, right? Now all of a sudden there's no tax to the employee, but what most businesses can do is they can actually loan that employee the tax that would be due, and
Hmm.
that loan now acts as collateral that says until the business owner forgives that loan, that employee is now somewhat doesn't have access to it. And then legally you create a vesting schedule where, hey, if you're here 5 years, we'll give it to you. If you're here
Right.
10 years, we'll give it to you, right? It's the traditional golden handcuff type strategy
Got
that
it.
you think of, but in
Hmm.
a way that is tax advantageous to the business owner and the employee, right?
Yep.
Because the business owner is still getting the deduction for everything.
Yep.
And now there's this retention type strategy.
Yep.
And also from a recruiting standpoint, having these things in place, you can go get that head of HR, that direct, the new controller that you may need, the new CFO, whatever it may be, because you have these non-traditional type offerings that you can
Yep.
do for these key people.
Yeah, and also, we talk about discrimination. That's typically a negative term, but it allows. It sounds like it allows you to tailor the offering, your compensation offering, to individual employees based on their goals and align the incentives and outcomes for each person individually, as opposed to having a blanket policy for everyone, where some people might not want to participate in a retirement plan right now, and you might not want to. That might be the only lever that you have. So it sounds like an interesting option.
And if structured correctly, this could also be an asset on the books of the business too, in
Wow,
terms of cash that they can utilize until that employee vests. This is now an asset for the business owner to utilize for different things.
interesting. So a lot of key variables there to consider. So let's get into the different types of insurance that entrepreneurs should think about. We talked about key man insurance. It's probably one of the most basic for everyone to think about. What is key man insurance, and then what are the other ones that you would recommend?
Sure. So from a business owner standpoint, right, key person insurance is basically the business owner owns an insurance policy on their key person. And if that key person were to pass away, the business owner gets the proceeds of, that policy on a tax-free basis. And what that's used for is it could be used because, to go out and hire that replacement, right? To go, we're in this employee driven market. You might need to go have a nice offer to go hire a top level talent. It can also provide a replacement of revenue until they can get that next executive or person in that maybe was driving revenue. So that's one component of it, right? Something that I think every entrepreneur should think of is utilizing insurance as part of their buy sell planning and exit planning. It's one of the most cost efficient ways of, protecting against, hey, this person either passed away, or the more likely scenario is they got sick, right? I mentioned my father was a CPA and he was a partner in a firm.
Yeah.
He was actually bought out of his firm by a disability policy. And that is another big misconception. When people think of disability policy, they think of the handicap sticker, right? Inevitably, they think of a wheelchair, they think of an accident. 90% of the time, it's an illness. And it's not the illness that you even might think of like a significant illness. It's the illness that might just prevent you from doing your job, right? So it could be, someone who types a lot has carpal tunnel syndrome, and all of a sudden now they can't do their job, right?
Right.
And the reason why business owners do this is if someone's an owner, right, they're still going to be getting distributions, they're still going to be getting paychecks, but if they're not driving revenue to the business, now it's hurting the business. And eventually the business says, you know what, it makes sense just to buy this person out. But from an entrepreneurial standpoint, especially startup standpoint, right, capital is a thing, cash
Yep.
flow is a thing. And let's say you have a business worth $5 million and you're 50% owner, you might not have $2.5 million to buy your partner out,
Right.
right? And so the insurance mechanism allows the business to do this in a very cost effective way without hurting the business.
Wow.
Right.
Very interesting. Yeah, it makes a lot of
That's
sense.
the end
But
game, right? There's also the things along the way, right? So businesses have expenses. They have rent, they have utilities, they've got taxes, they have loans, right? These are all operating, overhead expenses of the business,
yep.
right? And for someone starting out, particularly if they are, like most entrepreneurs in the beginning, they are the one driving revenue to the business. They're the one running the business. If they're sick in that same example, right? And they can't work, well, not only is their income subject to not coming in, but those expenses aren't going to stop, right?
Right.
And so, how do you prevent a business from shutting down if you still have those expenses to pay? Well,
Yep.
there's actually something called business overhead expense planning, right? Not business interruption in the sense of, hey, there's a hurricane came through or COVID happened or something like that. This is, hey, I'm the one driving the revenue of the business. I'm sick, but now I still have payroll. I still have loan, interest on loans they may have, And without kind of that protection, one of two things happens. Either the business folds, or they may be forced to sell at something much less than what they're worth just to recoup something. And so the way I like to think of this kind of planning is it keeps the business afloat until the business owner comes back, because
Yep.
it actually allows even for the replacement salary of a suitable. You're never going to replace yourself as the business owner, but you can find someone suitable to keep it running as part of that as well.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. And we talked about maximizing the value of the business. And when we look at the balance sheet of businesses, there's a big glaring hole that we don't ever look at, that no one really looks at, and that's the value of the entrepreneur itself to the business. And that's really hard to ascribe value to, but it's so important when thinking about building a business that's scalable and also protecting that business and the future of the business.
Yeah, and that's the way I look at even an individual client, right? So many times people are like, "Hey, they start listing out their assets, and they
Mhm.
may have a $3 million home, and whatever it may be,
Mhm.
right?" And I guess $3 million homes today is not what a $3 million home was before everything just went crazy. Uh, but at the same time, if you take a 40-year-old earning $500,000 a year, right? If they work 20 years, another 20 years, that's $10 million coming into their world. That's much bigger than their house, much bigger than their car, right? And
Yep.
so when you start to think of yourself as an asset, now the conversation changes in terms of what sort of planning should you be doing, what sort of protection should you be putting in place, because no one wants their lifestyle to change,
Right.
even if they're not here, they're not working.
Yeah. People want their lifestyle to grow. So that's a great point. So let's talk about tax. You touched on it a little bit, but how does tax come into play with insurance? And then we'll get to wealth management in a second.
Yeah. So I like to think of tax almost at the forefront of all of the planning that I do, because at the end of the day, what matters is your after tax return. Um, right. I don't care if someone's earning 10%. If they're paying 30% taxes on that, well, great. Now they earn 7%. Right.
Mhm.
And if you start to show people how you can get an after tax rate of return with less risk, now all of a sudden they're in a much more comfortable position, getting the same rates of return, right? And so when it comes to taxes, right, on the investment side, the wealth management side, it's where people typically think of taxes, right? Hey, it was a short term, I sold it within a year, I got to pay ordinary income tax, or you know what, I had this investment for a while, it's going to be capital gain tax, or where most people put money, and this will be a really good segue to tax planning on the insurance side, right? Most people, the first thing they do is max out their qualified dollars, their 401k, their IRA, whatever it may be.
Right.
And far too often, we see a disproportionate weight between money going to tax deferred vehicles and very little either going to currently taxable strategies like a brokerage account or managed money account, or tax free strategies, right? And the reason why this becomes important, right, is planning's a long game, right? And yes, in year one, someone may have gotten a better rate of return, but what they don't think about is how do those assets distribute to themselves during retirement,
Mm.
right? So someone could be literally maxing out their STEP IRA every single year, but now all of a sudden you have that huge contribution that you got a deduction for
Right.
growing deferred, right? And every dollar is now coming out as ordinary income in retirement, right?
Hmm.
Just for simple math, if someone gets to retirement with $5 million in their 401k, but tax rates go to 50%, they're now retiring on $2.5 million.
Right.
And so what we try to get clients to think about is both sides of the mountain, right? Going up the mountain gives you one set of planning rules, and going down the mountain is an entirely different set of
Yeah.
rules because you have no control over certain stuff. And so, from a planning standpoint, right, there's four unknowns. There are four unknowns in retirement, or four certainty of uncertainty is probably the best way to describe it, right? We don't know when these things are going to happen, but they're going to happen, right?
Yeah.
We don't know what taxes are going to be, but they're going to change. We
Yeah.
don't know what the market's going to do. It's going to go up and down, but we just don't know when, right? The other one's obvious, like healthcare, right? People get sicker as they get older. And then one of the biggest ones is longevity. People are living a lot longer than they used to, right? So how do how do entrepreneurs and individuals think of taxes with insurance is several things, right? And first, I'll kind of separate the business owner from the individual. I'll do the individual first because that's kind of very applies to everybody. And
Yep.
then we'll talk about how the business owner can take advantage of different things.
Yep.
Um, on the individual side, right? Especially someone who's earning good money and they are, let's say, maxing out these plans, right? Well, if you want to start to establish a tax-free asset for yourself in retirement, right? There's only so many options out there. There's a Roth IRA, which
Mhm.
probably 90% of the people listening to this make too much money to put into a Roth IRA,
Right.
right? There's, municipal bonds, which could have their fit, but typically that's the much older, person in retirement already looking for that steady coupon check coming every month. Um,
Yep.
it's not someone who's actually allocating dollars on a consistent basis to the strategy, right? And so then their question becomes is what else is there, right?
Mhm.
There are backdoor Roths and all of these strategies that people talk, the TikToks that keep coming out with the mega backdoor Roths and all these,
Yep.
there's so many things out there, right? But
Definitely.
at the end of the day, believe it or not, one of the few options out there that no matter how wealthy you are, you can utilize is using the cash value inside of an insurance plan as a tax-free asset to utilize as you see fit, right? And why does this work? Is that one is there's no income limitations. So someone could be making $2 million a year and still put as much as they want into this plan.
Mhm.
Um, there is no contribution limit like there are traditionally in qualified plans or other assets, right? And so you know I started one of these plans for myself 12 years ago at like $250 a month, and now
Mhm.
I have plans going at three, four, $5,000 a month. I've
Mhm.
got clients doing $1 million a year into these strategies,
Yep.
and there's lots of reasons why. So one is the tax side, right? We can't control future taxes, but we can control where our assets are and how those assets are going to be taxed, right? And so having this, it's almost like a Swiss Army knife. Well, great. If taxes go to 50% in retirement, I'm not going to touch my qualified dollars, right?
Mhm.
I have a tax-free asset for myself. Um, and so that's one of the biggest things to think about is
Yep.
after tax rates of return, right?
100%.
And then the other thing is that not all insurance strategies are designed the same way, right? And so in the permanent insurance space, there's whole life, there's universal life, there's the list can go on and on,
Right.
right? At the end of the day, though, they all have a cash value that you can utilize for different purposes. And so if we just look at whole life, for example, even in whole life, there is a spectrum of whole life strategies, right? So you have strategies that are designed to pay all the way till the day you die. And so for every dollar going into those plans, you're going to have the most insurance, but you're going to have the least amount of cash. On
Mhm.
the far opposite side are cash accumulating strategies where you're fully done paying after 8, 10, 12, 15 years, whatever you decide, right? And so for the same amount of dollars going into those, you have significantly more cash, but lower insurance amounts. So it really depends on what the individual is looking for. But if you're
Right.
looking to build a tax-free asset, right, people start looking on that accumulation side of the spectrum as opposed to the more insurance-focused side.
Sure. Yeah. Those are good details, and I think what you're talking about is needs to be tailored to each individual, right? Everyone individually needs to determine their portfolio, their holdings, their assets, their appetite for risk. And so,
Yeah, that's a great point, actually, right? Because when people say, how much should I be putting into this kind of strategy? We start having a risk tolerance conversation, right? And actually, before we even get there, the first thing we think about is if they don't have enough cash flow for this kind of strategy, the only thing we're recommending is term insurance because we want to make sure that they're actually protected appropriately, right?
right,
And if they're not protected appropriately, it doesn't matter how much investments they have. If something happens, the investments are gone. They're going to
right,
liquidate them, right? They're going to have bills to pay. They got to take care of their family, right? So the
yep,
first thing is making sure they have the right amount. Once
yep,
that's there, then it's saying, okay, what does cash flow look like? What do your asset allocation look like? And what's your risk tolerance, right? So just to give an example, if someone's saving $100,000 a year, right? And they're saying, you know what? I'm a 90-10 investor, Chad. I want 90% aggressive. I want 10% conservative. That's where we say, okay, of that 100 grand, let's see what 10% going into one of these strategies could look like. Because if they have a decent time horizon, over time, it outperforms bonds, it outperforms all of these other strategies without any of these other risks, right? Without market risk, without interest rate risk, without tax risk. And as when you get to retirement or as you get closer, the conservative asset becomes more important, right? Because people, you know this as a CPA, but a lot of
Mhm.
people don't realize that, hey, the interest and dividends that people are getting off their dividend stocks in retirement are the least efficient way you can get money in retirement. They're the highest taxed assets you can have,
Yep.
right? And it takes time to build them. And so if you start with that the end in mind and that going down the mountain, you can start building this asset early enough.
Sure, makes sense. Let's talk a little bit more about how insurance, or let's move a little bit to the wealth management and investing side. How does insurance play with investments, and do they go hand in hand, or are they opposites?
They go hand in hand in the sense that they balance each other out,
Yep.
right? In several ways. So the first is, we talked about these four, certainty of uncertainties, right?
Mhm.
If any one of those happen and you don't have the right insurance planning in place, well, now your investments are getting drained,
Mhm.
right? And they may be getting drained at an inopportune time, right? It's always, buy low, sell high.
Yep.
Well, if the market's tanking and you need money and you don't have another asset class to access dollars from, well, now that's the people that typically fear running out of money in retirement because they're bleeding a portfolio that's already down,
Right.
right? And I always give simple math with clients. It's like, if you have $100 and you lose 50%, right, you're down to $50. But to get back to even, you have to earn 100% on that 50,
All
right? And
right.
now imagine you're also pulling $10 out of that $50, and now you're down to 40. And so having this asset class that is not tied to the market becomes very, very important in terms of maximizing retirement, right?
Yep.
So it's called sequence of returns risk. It's something that you don't have to worry about in the accumulation phase because in the accumulation phase, if you're not pulling money out, you're going to get an average rate of return over time. But when you're distributing dollars, the timing of the market going up and down is where the biggest issues happen. And so the investments and insurance there do go hand in hand.
Yep.
Um, the other part of it, we talked about is taxes,
Mhm.
right? If you have all of your assets in either taxable or tax deferred accounts and you have no control over what future tax rates are, well, you have to actually, you can really cripple your retirement. um, and so they do go hand in hand. It's just really an asset allocation conversation,
Yep.
in terms of how much should be going to one versus another, and that is very, very, very individualized.
Makes sense. So, drilling in on that, how do you recommend people look at their and build their retirement plans? How do you work with your clients individually and help them determine out what their needs will be for in their retirement?
Yeah. So with every client, it really starts with just understanding them and what they're trying to accomplish, right? And also, depending on their level of wealth, what do they actually want to pass on to the next generation, right? We're at this crazy time right now where the estate tax credit is sunsetting at the end of 2025, right? And a lot of wealthy people are saying, you know what, my kids are going to have enough assets, let them pay the tax, right? And then on the flip side of it is the people that say, screw Uncle Sam, I want him to get as least as possible. I want my family to get it, right? And so that has to factor into kind of the retirement planning conversation, because retirement planning is not only you built basically you enter retirement with, you built up this nest egg and you decide what you want to do with it, right? Some people will spend it down to zero.
Yep.
Some people say, you know what, I'm only going to live off of, well, the rule that doesn't even apply anymore, that old 4% rule where you could live off your portfolio off, taking 4%, you'll be fine, right?
Right.
That was before people were living to 90, 95 years old. It
That's
doesn't
right.
really work anymore,
Yep.
right? And so there's one side of it is what income is the individual going to need, and the other part of it is what do they actually want to pass to their children, and that's a seesaw battle in itself, right? Because if people may want, and that's something that changes over time, right? Forever, my dad said, you know what, we're going to live off, we're going to enjoy my money together while I'm here. Like, you don't need to be left anything. You're successful. You're fine.
Yep.
Flash forward all these years after him getting sick for a period of time, he's healthy now. Now all of a sudden his goal is to, he wants to leave a legacy, right?
Yep.
And so people's goals change over time too. And so building options and flexibility into their plans is always at the forefront of it,
Yeah.
right? So from a retirement standpoint, which is kind of the question that you asked, right? Once someone is within, I would say, 10 to 15 years of where they want, their ideal retirement age, we start to work them into what's called the retirement income framework, right? And basically, we start with projecting out what their total assets will look like at retirement. And then from there, conceptually, right? Not talking investments, not talking products, not talking anything, just concepts, right? We break it down into four main buckets. One is the necessary expenses, right? This is your food, your housing, your transportation, your medical costs, the bare bones, right? It's not going to Capital Grill. It's not taking a cruise around Europe. It's
Yeah.
what are these necessary expenses? And with those projected total assets, what we like to do is find a consistent, predictable income stream to match those necessary expenses, right?
Yep.
Because if you can carve that off of a portion, well, now you've eliminated that running out of money kind of fear that a lot of people have. And so there's a lot of things that can satisfy that necessary requirement. Some are available now, some might not be there when we need it, right? So security typically is a portion of that, right? You know what your benefit's going to be. If you're on it, you know what's coming, right? It used to be, pensions used to be another example.
Sure.
But like all good things, the government takes away, they said, you know what, we're going to shift the responsibility of pensions away from the company onto the individual. And that's what the 401k world kind of became. There's
Yep.
very few pensions now, right?
Right.
But there are ways of essentially creating your own pension with your assets to satisfy that first bucket.
Yeah. Awesome.
Then the second bucket is really that discretionary bucket. That is kind of saying, hey, what lifestyle do I want to live after I kind of cover the necessities? And so from there, in that section, we like to break it down to different time frames. Typically, years 1 through 3, years 4 through 7, and 7+, and we allocate some of their total assets into those different time frames. Many times people think, oh, I'm an 80-20 investor. The whole portfolio needs to be invested 80% aggressive, 20% conservative. That's not the case at all. You can have a portfolio subdivided into different segments for different purposes, right? And so we like to look at that so that they're not getting into risky assets until we are 7+. And
Yeah.
it's needed, though, to keep up with cost of living, inflation, all of these things.
Sure.
Right? The third bucket is all the wealth depleters, right? Healthcare costs being the biggest one, right? And this is how you know something is a wealth depleter, right? It used to be there were 30, 40 long-term care insurance carriers out there, right? We're now down to like 3 or 4. They all went out of business. They all went out of business because it was not a profitable business because
That's right.
every
Yeah.
long-term care plan pays out, right?
Depleted interval.
It's a huge wealth depleter, right? And so that is something that we have to plan for, and there's ways of doing it.
Sure.
With lawsuits, taxes, market, that's kind of all in those wealth depleter section. And then the last is the estate planning side,
Yep.
right? Making sure that your assets, are going to go to the people that you want them to go to, and when you want to go to them, and how you want it to go to them. That's
Yep.
a huge component.
Makes
And then also that they're being distributed. Most people pass away, their largest assets are in their qualified plans because no one wants to pay tax on those dollars. And we could bore everyone to death with all of the rules around required minimum distributions to people that inherit them, but it could cause a mess, and it's a messy situation. And so factoring that into the planning becomes a part of it. And then again, for estate tax planning, for those that are wealthy enough, that's something to consider as well. And it's not just those that are wealthy enough now, because with this sunsetting of the credit that's going on, if you're married, it's going from 27 million to like 13.5 million. And yes, there's plenty of 35, 40-year-olds out there that are nowhere near 13.5 million now. But if you look at a $3-4 million portfolio, even growing at 3-4%, you're going to be well over that $13 million threshold
Yep.
by the time that tax is due. And so how do you plan for that?
Sure. Those are great considerations. I think we did a really good job starting at the entrepreneur as a business owner, optimizing business income and incentivizing employees, mitigating risk, flowing all the way to the individual, which is the end goal for everyone starting a business, to have that overall wealth creation and wealth maintenance. So great job there, Chad. We're just about,
we talked about kind of the business side.
yeah,
If structured correctly legally, the buy-sell planning that you do as a business owner can actually be transferred to you individually when the business sells or you no longer want to be a part of the business, to now take care of all of these things we just talked about as an individual. And it's very, very important. The Supreme Court actually just came out with a decision on this a couple of weeks ago in terms of how these plans are structured and how it could negatively impact the business owner if not structured correctly.
wow, that's a really important consideration. Good to know. Definitely need to look into that. This has all been super helpful, Chad. Given a lot of people to a lot of things to think about how insurance and wealth management pertains to them and their strategy. If someone's interested in working with you or learning more about you and Connect Financial, where can they find you?
Sure. I'm an open, I always say, my kids don't like this, but my cell is my work number, right? And so, I'm happy to share it on here, or if you would share it in the notes, it's, that's probably the easiest
You
way.
got it. We'll put it in the notes.
Yeah, I'm happy to put that in my notes. The Connect Financial website is currently, almost it is
Being
it's up and
finalized.
running, right? But in the meantime, my email is super easy way right now. It's ctorrin at mycoastalwealth.com. And then obviously most of the clients that I work with come from individuals like yourself. I don't advertise or do radio. It's kind of word of mouth, and yeah.
Awesome. And any social media, LinkedIn?
So LinkedIn, Facebook. If compliance is getting around to it, the FINRA and the SEC is probably the most regulated social media industry out there in terms of what
Yep.
to deal with. But Instagram, I know, is coming down the pipeline probably by the end of this year.
Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Chad, this has been super helpful. I really appreciate you joining and giving a lot of knowledge to our listeners. We'll be
Absolutely.
sure to have you back
To
on
the
soon.
listeners, one thing I would say is there's a phenomenal study by Ernst and Young that probably summarizes everything I just said in a unbelievably easy to understand format. How when you combine investments with insurance with income annuities, you maximize your retirement.
Awesome. Well, that's super important, and working with the right professional can make this a seamless experience. So, if anyone's interested, reach out to Chad. If you have any questions, reach out to us, and look forward to talking to you soon.
Absolutely, Jeff. Thanks.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chad.
Take care.